people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. Do good anyway.
It's really great to be here at Manoa Valley Church. This is a church where my wife and I were married. This is where our children were baptized. This is a church where so many people have been so good to us for so many years. We're really grateful. I'm here today to talk about leadership. You know, when I was growing up, talk about leadership always seemed to be about how to accumulate and wield power, how to make people do things, how to attack and win. It was always about clever strategies and applying pressure. And it was about leading without worrying too much about the limitations of morality or ethics. It was the power model of leadership. Now, there are some severe problems with the power model. First of all, it emphasizes having power, not using it wisely. Second, it promotes and even glorifies conflict between power groups. It's very divisive. Third, it defines victory in terms of who gains more power, not in terms of who accomplishes more for their organization or society. There's some real problems with the power model for the leader herself or himself. A leader who is focused on getting power is focused on himself or herself, not on the people that he or she is supposed to be serving. And they very easily become disconnected. They easily become irrelevant to the people they're supposed to serve. Even worse, a leader who seeks power can never, ever get enough. It becomes a kind of addiction, a kind of disease. A person imagines, well, if I had more power, I'd be happy. And they get more power, and they're not happy. So they assume if I had more power, I'd be happy. And they get more power, and they're still not happy. It leads to a kind of spiritual corruption and an unhappy life of self-torment. Now, fortunately, there is another model of leadership. It's thousands of years old, and it's the service model. People who use the service model are often described as servant leaders. Well, who is a servant leader? A servant leader is simply a leader who's focused on serving others. A servant leader loves people and wants to help them. So a servant leader doesn't go around asking, how do I get power? How do I make people do things? The servant leader asks, what do people need? How can I help them to get it? What does my organization need to do? How can I help my organization to do it? So rather than embarking on a quest for personal power, the servant leader embarks upon a quest to identify and meet the needs of others. That's the mission of the servant leader, to identify and meet the needs of others. You know, there's some really big differences between the service model and the power model. One of them is this. In the power model, the leader tries to make people do things. In the service model, the leader tries to help people do things. That's why servant leaders are often facilitators, coordinators, partners, healers, coalition builders. Another difference is this. In the power model, there's a hierarchy is assumed. You know, one of those pyramids. The lines and boxes and arrows, and you've got the president or CEO or prime minister at the top, and then the deputies or vice presidents and so on all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid. The power model assumes that only the people at the top have power. The service model assumes no hierarchy at all. The service model assumes that anybody in any family or organization or community can be of service. Anybody can identify and meet the needs of others. Anybody can be a servant leader. There are many different kinds of servant leaders. Each of us uses our own personalities and our experiences, and we bring those to bear as we do our work. What's common for a servant leader is to go into a situation or an organization and try to identify, is there some missing link? Is there a gap? Is there some kind of blockage that's making it hard for this group to achieve what it wants to achieve? And if so, what kind of leadership, what kind of service would fill that gap or provide that missing link or remove that blockage so that action and achievement is possible. Now, that particular kind of problem or issue will be different in every case. So what the servant leader does will be different in every case. We live in a real world. Somebody is going to exercise power. And it makes a difference who that somebody is. Servant leaders can accumulate and exercise power. They can even become angry and enter the fray to do battle. But when they accumulate power and when they do battle, it is on behalf of others. It is on behalf of others. Servant leaders act in response to the way other people are treated, not in response to the way they are treated. You know, servant leadership is not a new idea. Servant leadership can be found in the Gospels, in Mark, in Matthew. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 25 to 28, Jesus gathers his disciples together and he says this, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Jesus went on to say that he came to serve, not to be served. So in this passage in the Gospels, Jesus clearly distinguishes between leadership characterized by power and authority and leadership characterized by service. And he made it clear that for his followers, leadership is to be characterized by service. That's what he taught. And that's what he demonstrated in his ministry. He fed the hungry. He healed the sick. He reached out to the outcast. He served. The concept of servant leadership can be found in Taoism. The Daodejing consists of ancient writings attributed to Lao Tzu. He was a sage who lived in China about 500 BC and is thought of as the founder of Taoism. In the Daodejing, Lao Tzu has a passage where he describes a leader who is so effective that he's almost invisible. When the great deeds are done, the people say, "We did this of our own free will. We did this ourselves." The modern servant leadership movement in America was launched by Robert Greenleaf in the 1970s. Robert Greenleaf distinguished between leaders who are leader first and servant first. And of course, those that are servant first are servant leaders. This is what he said. "The leader first and the servant first are two extreme types. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test, and difficult to administer, is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants?" You know, when you become aware of the idea of servant leadership, you start noticing servant leaders everywhere. You notice them in history, in literature, in books, in movies, and in daily life all around us. When I think of historical servant leaders, I think of some obvious ones like Washington and Lincoln, Father Damien, Clara Barton, Harriet Tubman, Albert Schweitzer, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. There have been many famous servant leaders. But my guess is that most servant leaders have not been known outside the organizations or communities they've served. They have been like Lao Tzu's servant leader, so effective that they're almost invisible. One of my favorite examples of servant leadership in literature is from the book Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is a wonderful fable about a group of rabbits that sets out to find a new home. Now, Hazelraw becomes the chief rabbit. And this is really interesting because Hazelraw is not the biggest rabbit. He's not the cleverest. He's not the most clairvoyant. But he becomes the chief rabbit for a number of reasons. He listens and accepts advice. He understands the strengths and weaknesses of all the other rabbits, and he's able to draw out their strengths for the good of the group. He helps the rabbits to identify what their needs and goals are and unites them in taking action to fulfill those needs and meet those goals. And he's willing to take personal risks. At one point in the book, he's willing to put his own life on the line for the good of the group. So here you have Hazel Raw, a servant leader in a participatory community. Those rabbits face some hard times. They're severely tested, but they do succeed in finding a new home. One of the really superb movies by Kurosawa Akira is the movie Aikido, I-K-I-R-U. In Japanese, it means to live. This is a movie about Kanji Watanabe. He's a Japanese government bureaucrat who discovers that he's dying of cancer and probably has only 6 months to live. And his first reaction is to feel sorry for himself. He wanders around the city, he drinks, he doesn't know what to do. And then he decides that what he's going to do is he's going to make a difference before he dies. He's going to help establish a playground in a neighborhood where the children have no place to play. Now, the mothers of those children have been coming to the government asking for a playground, and they've been going from government agency to government agency to government agency to government agency, and everybody's been passing the buck, and nobody's been willing to help them. So Kanji Watanabe takes up their cause. And each month he's in greater pain and greater pain, but with great courage and with great persistence, he manages to get that playground built. And he dies there one night, sitting in one of the swings, singing softly one of his favorite childhood songs, completely at peace, probably for the first time in his life. At last, his life meant something. He had helped somebody. He had become a servant leader, and he had made a difference. One of my favorite historical servant leaders is Florence Nightingale. Now, there was quite a lady. Florence Nightingale was an English woman. She was born in 1820. She died in 1910. She lived to be 90. Florence Nightingale wanted to be a nurse. She was born into a wealthy family. Her parents were horrified that she wanted to be a nurse. Nurses had very bad reputations in those days. I won't even tell you how bad. But she wanted to be a nurse. And she went off to Germany and got some training, went back to London, was managing a small hospital in London when the Crimean War broke out. The British government asked her to take a group of nurses to Russian Crimea. She arrived with 38 nurses and found 5,000 sick and wounded men in bare buildings. There was nothing there. She worked really hard. She worked 20 hours a day, and she was able to get the buildings equipped. She was able to sanitize the hospital. She was able to dramatically improve the treatment of those soldiers. After the war, she wrote this huge book about army hospitals and established a training school for nurses. She is often seen as the founder of modern nursing. Florence Nightingale was a servant leader who saved thousands of lives. Servant leaders can be politicians, they can be business leaders, they can be nonprofit leaders, they can be coaches, neighbors, friends. And they are leaders. They do the things that leaders do. I mean, they articulate a vision, they motivate, they manage, they communicate. What distinguishes them from other leaders is their focus and motivation. They are focused on others, not just themselves, and they work hard to make life better for others, not just for themselves. I think that's what distinguishes, no matter what their titles or roles or positions. Well, what does that mean in everyday life? Well, I think you see that difference in focus and motivation when people make decisions. For example, a power-oriented leader who's making a decision may ask questions like this. Will this make me look good? Will this enhance my power? Will this give me the visibility I want? Will this be a great way to get ahead of my rivals? Will this improve my relationship with my boss? Will this position me for my next promotion? Power-oriented questions. A service-oriented person, a servant leader, will ask a different kind of question. Whose needs are we trying to meet? Are there greater needs that should be met before this one? If we meet this need, are we going to hurt anybody? And is there any way to mitigate the harm? Is this decision consistent with the values and goals of my organization? Different kinds of questions. Different questions result in different answers, different decisions, and different impacts. Now, why would anybody want to be a servant leader? Why would anybody want to be one? Well, I think people become servant leaders because they make a moral choice and a discovery about where to find meaning in life. Let's talk about the moral choice. When you realize that people have needs, you've really only got three options. Now, I know life is complicated and there's a lot of gray areas, but you've really only got three options. First, you can ignore people's needs, which is not a moral response. Secondly, you can exploit their needs and take advantage of them for your own personal gain, which is an even worse moral failure. Or three, you can help. You can try to meet people's needs. Now, the third option is the only moral one. No matter what happens, that's still the only moral one, and that's the option that servant leaders choose. That's where they live. They continue to try to help no matter what. Now, I know that if you go out to do what's right and good and true and things don't work and you feel discouraged and disappointed, it may be really tempting to switch to one of the immoral options of ignoring or exploiting. But there's really no moral justification for doing that. You've got to keep trying to do what's right, keep trying to help people no matter what happens. Appreciation is a big issue. If you want to be appreciated, that's normal. Everybody wants to be appreciated. But if a servant leader craves applause, that's a problem. Because if you crave applause, you're focused on who? Yourself. What you need. You need other people's applause. What you need to focus on instead is just the meaning and satisfaction that you get when you do what's right and good and true. That's yours no matter what. Nobody can take that away from you. That's yours no matter what happens. I think I was very fortunate to learn that early in life. Matter of fact, I remember the moment that it first occurred to me. That moment was when I walked into the awards ceremony at Roosevelt High School my senior year. I was walking into the stadium, and it just occurred to me that I felt so good about what I had learned. I felt so good about who I'd helped. I felt so good about what we had accomplished together that I didn't need any awards. I just didn't need them. I had already been rewarded. I'd already been rewarded with that sense of meaning and satisfaction that came from having done all those things. And that was a real breakthrough for me. I felt this immense liberation. I felt this tremendous inner peace. 2 years later, in 1968, at the height of the unrest on college campuses, I was working with high school student leaders, and I wrote a little leadership manual for them. And in that booklet, I challenged them with what I call the Paradoxical Commandments. This is what I wrote. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you're successful, you'll win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. The biggest men and women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and women with the smallest minds. Think big anyway. People favor underdogs, but follow only top dogs. Fight for a few underdogs anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. And finally, give the world the best you have and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have anyway. 10 Paradoxical Commandments. The Paradoxical Commandments are guidelines for finding personal meaning in the face of adversity. So each one begins with something that's adverse, something that's difficult and unhappy. I mean, people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Those are difficult things. Those are not fun at all. But each one is followed by the positive commandment. Love people anyway. help people anyway, do good anyway. The paradox is that even when things in the world out there are really difficult, even when things out there are really going badly, we can still find personal meaning and deep happiness. We find that happiness by facing the worst in the world with the best in ourselves. You know, as individuals, there's just so many things we don't control. As individuals, we don't control the economy, we don't control population growth, we don't control which politician will get elected and what their policy is going to be. We don't control natural disasters, fires and floods. We don't control when a terrorist might attack or a war might start. We don't control what companies are going to be formed, what jobs will open up, and which ones will be downsized, and which jobs will disappear. We work hard, we prepare, we seize opportunities. We've got to do that. We should do that. But as individuals, there's just a whole lot of things we don't control. What we do control is our inner lives. We get to decide who we're going to be and how we're going to live. And we can live our most cherished values, and we can be close to our family and friends, and we can do what's right and good and true no matter what. No matter what. And the good news is, that's where people find the most personal meaning. And even better news is that personal meaning is a key to being deeply happy. Now, what do I mean by deep happiness? I'm thinking of something that really touches your spirit, that really connects with your soul. Some people call it self-actualization, some call it self-fulfillment, some call it being centered. For people of faith, it's about finding God's will for their lives. But whatever it is, personal meaning is a key element. Some people look at the Paradoxical Commandments as a personal declaration of independence. A declaration of independence from all the stuff out there we just don't control. But we know we can be happy anyway. Some people call it a no excuses policy. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. So what? That's no excuse. Gotta love them anyway. Gotta love them anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. So what? That's no excuse. You don't run out and do bad. Still gotta do good. Gotta do good anyway. People have come up to me and said, you know, Kent, you must have been having a really bad year when you wrote the Paradoxical Commandments. You know, they just look at the statement of adversity in front. They're not really looking at the positive commandment. I say, you know, I've always been optimistic. I was then, I am now. I think that if you go out and do what's right and good and true, you will often be successful. You'll often be recognized and rewarded. The question is, what if you aren't? What if things don't work out? What if nobody notices the good stuff you're doing? And the answer is, so what? You still got to be who you got to be. You still got to do what you got to do. You still got to live your values, be close to your family and friends, and do what's right and good and true. Because that's where the personal meaning is. That's where the happiness is to be found. This brings me to the second reason that I think people become servant leaders. They find out where the meaning is to be found. Now, each of us wants to be successful. That's fine. I don't recommend that we get up in the morning and rush out to be failures. I mean, each of us wants to be successful. But the search for meaning and the search for success are not the same search. They may overlap, but they're not the same. Our culture, our secular commercial culture, pushes us really hard towards symbols of success like power and wealth and fame, even though those symbols of success provide relatively little personal meaning. Power, big symbol of success. But people learn over time there's so much more meaning in service. Wealth, big symbol of success. But people learn that there's more meaning in just enjoying the richness of daily life, family, friends, hobbies, sunsets. Fame is a big symbol of success, but people know there's more meaning in being known intimately to a few people than being known very superficially to millions of people. The symbols of success are not necessarily bad. They're just not enough. They're just not enough when it comes to finding personal meaning. For that, we've got to look for personal meaning where people have been able to find it for thousands of years, and that's in loving people and helping people and doing what's right and good and true. You know, I believe that in most countries, in most cultures, in most centuries, people have discovered that love gives them the greatest meaning in life. Happy people are people who know how to give and receive love. When you love people, you want to help them. Not with a kind of grudging, reluctant sense of duty, but with a sense of excitement about sharing and contributing. The happiest people I know are busy, loving, and helping others. That's why servant leadership is not about self-denial. Servant leadership's not about self-sacrifice. Servant leadership is about self-fulfillment. People are happier and healthier and more fulfilled when they are busy loving and helping others. That's what servant leaders discover. If you are not already a servant leader, I urge you to become one. The life of servant leadership will draw upon all that you are and stimulate you to grow and become all of the many things that you can be. The life of servant leadership will draw upon your wisdom, your compassion, your strength, your skill. The life of servant leadership is an exciting, meaningful, satisfying life. Let me conclude with a short summary. Society teaches us the power model, but you will find more meaning and will be more effective if you use the service model. You can be a servant leader. As a servant leader, you won't make people do things, you'll help people do things. You'll focus on identifying and meeting the needs of others. When you live the life of a servant leader, you know you're living the only moral option. Not ignoring, not exploiting, but helping others. You understand the Paradoxical Commandments, and you do what's right and good and true, no matter what. By loving and helping others, you find personal meaning and deep happiness. The kind of happiness that touches your spirit and connects with your soul. There is no doubt in my mind that to be an effective and relevant leader who finds personal meaning and deep happiness, one must be a servant leader, dedicated to making life better for others. Thank you.
People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them, help people anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have. Anyway, yeah. Anyway.